This was a tricky one to design. I had to account for rotational clearances, material thickness. I wanted to get the drawer underneath, the wheels. All of it had to fit just right and be perfectly square, and I'm pretty proud of what I came up with. And with that ultra precise design in hand, it's time to start crawling around on the floor cutting down plywood. And upon realizing my track saw does not make perfectly square cuts, I square them up on the table saw. Fun fact about this build, I bought some of the plywood at Lowe's and some of the plywood at Home Depot, and both places advertised this as being true 3/4 inch plywood, but surprise surprise, one of them was 3/4 and one of them was not. Anyway, after some high-speed chopping, it's time for some high-speed stacking. Ah, that felt good. And now we drill massive amounts of holes. Trusty Craig pocket hole jig, nothing else like it. Except of course for all the Chinese knockoffs. But my darling wife bought me the Craig for Christmas. Like lots of people, I bought the cheap $40 handheld, comes with a little hand clamp unit. Quickly realized that thing is annoying as hell, and then asked my wife to go ahead and spend the $200 on this unit. It's actually totally worth the money. I actually told my wife I needed the pocket hole jig to make her some new cabinets for the laundry room. And lo and behold, Santa brought me a pocket hole jig. Santa also brought her a new vacuum. Anyway, back to the build. One of my favorite features of this design are these little shoulders you see me cutting with the jigsaw. These really help the flipping mechanism work a lot better. Got the idea from another YouTuber, but it seems to work really well, as you'll see by the end of the video. Some of the other flip carts on YouTube just seemed a little flimsy. Didn't seem to have a lot of lateral stiffness, in my opinion. So I came up with this design. It features some shelves on the sides that are both glued and pocket screwed in, and these are sort of double benefit, where you get extra storage on the sides and it provides lateral stiffness. Another feature I wanted to include was a full width base, which is one piece that goes all the way across. The wheels screw into the base. The vertical supports on the sides are both glued and screwed into the base. And this really provides, with that monolithic structure at the bottom, just gives you the most possible strength. So quite a lot of pocket hole screws, but you'll see it worked out quite well. Little pro tip for you. If you have one of these pocket hole jigs and you don't want to buy the expensive Craig branded screws, you can actually just buy particle board screws. A lot of the big box stores sell them. They might call them by a different name, but they're essentially exactly the same. They got that washer head. They come in the same lengths. They're virtually exactly the same. You see me here using a lot of clamps, getting creative. This is all really just for alignment. The pocket holes will hold everything in while the glue dries, but I wanted to make sure alignment was just absolutely perfect and spot on. At this point, the thing is very square and very stiff, but there's one final piece to put in the back, and this is glued all the way around and pocket screwed, and this is just one last piece to really force that thing into square and just provide that last bit of stiffness. Get these last couple of screws here, do a little bit of glue cleanup, and then it's off to the hardware store to pick up the wheels, because I didn't get them the last time I was there. Funny story, I got the wheels, but I forgot to buy screws. Thankfully, I had just enough to get 2 per wheel, and that held it on strong enough that I was comfortable flipping this thing over and continuing on with the build. Next, I called in my certified quality control tester. Thank goodness I passed the quality control inspection. Next up is the flip top. Now you'll notice this piece of plywood is cut to slightly oversized length, and that's so that you have little tabs sticking out that will rest on those shoulders. You'll see what I mean in a minute here. The flip top needs to be very strong, and it needs to have space both for long screws to anchor the tools in so they can be supported upside down, and it also has to have room for cords because I want to put the cords in the middle. So I end up taking some 2x3s, planing them down to exactly 2 inches, and essentially using those to build a torsion box. After cutting these to length, I realized my flip top is just a hair too wide, so bust out the trusty Kreg track saw and just trim off a hair. I use a 1-inch Forstner bit to drill the holes for my steel axle. For the axle material, I'm using a 3/4 inch iron pipe that I got from Home Depot. Problem is, this 3/4 inch pipe is actually about 1 1/8 inch outside diameter, which means it doesn't fit in my 1-inch hole. So I had to ream that hole using the Forstner bit. Forstner bits are not good for reaming. I then also used a round file to ream that hole out some more. In the end, I did get the pipes to fit, but the hole was not perfectly centered and not perfectly circular. So a mild annoyance to be sure. If you are going to build one of these, keep that in mind. You might want to make sure you have the right drill bit, or else buy a different size pipe that fits with the drill bits that you have. I bought this standard T-coupler so that the pipe from either end can screw in the middle, and then I was a little bit worried because the threads inside are quite sharp, and I didn't want that rubbing against the extension cord that I'm going to pass through there. So I also bought another little coupler that just threads in. I just cranked it in as far as I could just to cover up those threads. You can see that little stub sticking out. It actually worked out good because then I could put that metal strapping on it and force it not to rotate when you flip the tool cart back and forth. One important thing to note, this extension cord is the thickest one I could find. It's not rated for 20 amp. It is still rated for 15 amp, but the cord, the wires, the conductors inside it are a 12 gauge. So in theory, it should be okay for a 20 amp circuit. And that was important because those DeWalt planers, especially if you upgrade them to a helical cutter head, eventually they can pull, 20 plus amps. So 20 amp circuit, it even says so in the manual, recommends that you use a 20 amp circuit if you can, although it does work fine on 15 amp. The 20 is recommended. So anyway, that's why I bought the thickest cable I could find. They're quite expensive at the store, but if you just get them from Amazon, it's about 35 bucks. Once I had the flip top in place, I had to do a bunch of trimming on the shoulders, and this was just so I could get the flip top to sit level. I had intentionally cut these a little bit high so that I could come back and do that final fit. Look at that high quality chisel work. This next part took me an embarrassingly long time. I was constantly putting this top off and on, trying to figure out where my screws were going to line up, where I needed to add blocking. I don't show it all here, but I ended up with way more blocking than this, just trying to make sure I got enough blocking so that I can anchor my planer down properly. Once I had that under control, it was time to trim those rods down to their final length. And then clean them up nicely with the grinder and the hand file. If you notice me cutting well beyond my line, I decided I wanted to have probably 1/4 to 1/2 inch sticking out, just in case I need to get in there and loosen them up. I wanted to have enough sticking out that I could grab onto it with a pipe wrench. It actually worked out pretty good. And this part I'm using a 1.5 inch Forstner bit to drill a hole in the top and bottom. This will be a cable pass-through. And because my ADHD kicked in and I didn't want to keep working on the top, I decided to finish up the shelves. So, a whole bunch of pocket holes, and away we go. Once again, glued and screwed. I cut a 9-inch spacer so that I could get these at a consistent height. It worked just fine. And repeat the process for the other side. Now I realize this isn't exactly the Mona Lisa here. It's really not much to look at. This is really intended just to be functional. I did toy with the idea of putting some edge banding, and maybe even some finish on this thing, and I may still do that eventually, but for now I just want to get this thing done, get the video out there. I'm trying to get my channel going. My intention for this design is to have as much of my sanding accessories on the cart as possible. So all of my sand blocks, all of my sanding belts, sandpapers of various sizes and shapes. I really want to just have it all on here. And while the glue dries, it's time to line up my tools, screw them down, and give this thing a quick test. Now these DeWalt planers are really wide, and part of the reason is the handle sticks out an extra 3 or 4 inches or so. So by the time you get the width of the machine plus the handle, the width of the flip top has got to be about 28 inches. So it's pretty wide. Once again, it was Amazon to the rescue. These crappy little Chinese latches were, I think I paid $20 for a 10-pack. Home Depot, you could buy one at a time for $10 each. I needed 4 of them, so it was half the price, and I got 6 extras by ordering from Amazon. And the other nice thing about these is they are adjustable, so if you need to tighten or loosen the latch, you just give it a quick twist, and away you go. And with the cart out of the way, it's time to start working on the drawers. This is the same 1/2-inch birch plywood. It's not Baltic birch, it's just your cheap shop grade birch that you get from the big box store. Still cost me an arm and a leg, but it was the cheapest they had, and it's better than the rough stuff. Now this drawer is kind of slapped together the quickest way possible, but it should be pretty strong. I've fully glued it, and I'm using 18 gauge brad nails with my trusty Ryobi brad nailer. Now pro tip, you see me use my benchtop there as alignment for the nailer. That's a really fast way to get those nails in without risking them poke through the other side. I had originally intended to put a nice faceplate on this drawer, but I decided in the end I will just stick with the theme of this being shop grade, and decided it looks pretty good the way it is. Next, it's time to install the slides. Now, remember, always put your slides in first when you have a very small drawer, because this was a major pain in the butt. I used a little spacer just to bring those slides off the bottom about 3/8 of an inch. With a little bit of fighting, I got them screwed in. Here you can see how annoying it was. I had to sort of invent a new technique here to reach way to the very back to get that last screw in. A little bit of fighting, it went in. Now, it's usually best if your drawer is about 1/16 of an inch too narrow. It's better for your drawer slides to not be pushing so tight the way I have it. It actually works fine, but if I could do it all over again, I would have trimmed it another 1/16 of an inch narrower. If there are any soldering experts watching this, please leave me a comment on how to do this properly, because I could not get the cables hot enough to take the solder. The way I did it is pretty terrible. I ended up basically just pushing the solder into the iron to get it melt, and then just kind of crimped it tight with my pliers. I was able to get the shrink wrap over it, and when I fired this thing up to test it, nothing started on fire. So I'll call that a win, but yeah, if you guys know how to solder something like this, let me know. I decided to give the once over with a sander just to round off some of those sharp edges so I don't catch a finger or back of my hand on a sharp edge. And the final, install this little unit here for holding my cord.